Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We are your host, Jack Stern, Spencer Michaelis, coming to you each week to recap all things Brewers. Spencer, how are you doing on this fine Thursday evening that we're recording this?
Doing pretty well. I was just telling you before we started, but I had never had allergies in my life, and I apparently developed them at 25 years old. I guess it's not super uncommon, but it is very annoying, I have to tell you. I woke up like 6 times in the middle of the night sneezing last night, so I'm pretty tired. So we'll see how this goes, but otherwise doing pretty decent. How about you, Jack?
Got a little bit of a dry throat today. I'm not sure why, but we'll try to weather through the program this evening when neither one of us are in our best podcasting shape right now. But, sometimes life throws you a curveball and you just got to find a way to deal with it. It was a good week for the Brewers this week, even if we're not feeling the greatest right now. The Brewers wrapping up their road trip, bouncing back from a very rough series in Philly to take 2 out of 3 from the Tigers, and then they came home and took 2 out of 3 against the Blue Jays. So really nice showing for the Brewers this week, and I guess we can just dive right into it right off the bat here. We'll start with that Tigers series, the Brewers taking 2 out of 3 in that one, like I just said. And starting with game one, the Brewers offense really roared back to life here to start this series. Remember, they really struggled in that series in Philly to get some runs across against some really good pitching. And it seemed like maybe we'd see a continuation of that in game one because they were up against another one of the better starters in baseball this year, former Brewers farmhand Reese Olson, who was sent to Detroit in the regrettable Daniel Norris trade of 2021. That might be quite possibly the only trade that David Stearns has made where from the very start it seemed like it was just a really bad process. Spencer, I'm not going to give you too much leeway to rehash that because I know you have some sour feelings about that one.
Yeah, it was Olson was up there in terms of my pitching prospect list at the time. Big fan of his. I guess the only other one at the time that I was really upset about with Stearns was probably the Tristan Peters for Trevor Rosenthal. That really didn't end up mattering either way. Peters is kind of a quad A type player, but those are the only two times I think I can remember being genuinely upset when a trade happened. So this one I feel like I was proven correct on. Unfortunately, I wish I wasn't, but Norris was terrible and Olson has been quite good.
Yeah, my thing with that trade was taking a flyer on Daniel Norris was not a bad idea, but you don't need to trade a bona fide pitching prospect to get a Daniel Norris type project. You can scoop up a Daniel Norris on waivers instead of making that kind of deal for him. My hot take, though, as far as the trade line moves go, I still think the Trevor Rosenthal trade was fine. I actually liked it at the time, and even though it didn't work out, I still thought it was fine because, again, like, I know it's kind of mixed opinions on Peters. I think more people kind of started looking at the more positive potential to his outlook as soon as that trade was made. But Trevor Rosenthal at the time was rehabbing, and his stuff was looking about as good as it had when he was at his peak. So I understand what they were doing there, and I should wrap this tangent up pretty quickly here. But I think that in that situation, the Brewers were hoping they would get a guy back for the stretch run and then the playoffs too. That's a big part of this equation as well. I know Milwaukee missed the playoffs that year, but if you're getting a fresh Trevor Rosenthal back during the final month of the year and he hasn't pitched all year, you're in a position where if you're in the playoffs, you can probably ride him really, really hard in the postseason, knowing you're not going to re-sign him. I think that's kind of what they were going for there, but it didn't work out. But I digress. Back to Reese Olson, who started for the Tigers in game one here. The offense really doing a number on him. It didn't seem like that was going to be the case because he struck out 3 out of 4 hitters faced in the first inning. But then the Brewers bouncing back with a 5-run second, kicked off by a Joey Ortiz RBI single. Blake Perkins followed with an RBI triple, and then another RBI single by Bryce Terang. The Brewers ended up putting up 12 hits and 8 earned runs against Reese Olson. Big hit to some of his numbers this year. So if you look at Reese Olson's performance on the year so far, the numbers look more solid than great, but that's essentially the result of the damage the Brewers did to him in this game. Blake Perkins had a really nice game as well. That first RBI triple he hit was not the only one he would hit in this game. He would triple again in the 5th inning. Blake Perkins got off to a really hot start this year and then basically didn't do a whole lot of anything for about 2 to 3 weeks, and now he's swinging the bat a lot better again. So we'll kind of get to a discussion on the outfield picture as we move further into the program here. But we will have some more Blake Perkins discourse for you all. Tobias Myers delivered the longest start by a Brewer this year. And if you had it on your bingo card that Toby Myers was going to have the longest start of the year for the Brewers in June already, I don't think anyone could say that. I don't even think I could say that. And I was, even you as well, Spencer. I think we were two of the few people who had Tobias Myers on our radars going into this year, but I never would have told you that he would have thrown 8 innings of one hit shutout baseball in June for quite possibly the best start by a Brewer this year, just in terms of the box score results and the value he brought in that outing. 3 walks for him, 5 strikeouts. Did a really nice job in this one. I only got a chance to see bits and pieces of this game because I was traveling to Detroit at the time to cover the rest of the series. So, Spencer, do you kind of want to fill in just how Myers did or what you saw specifically from him in this outing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should point out that the only hit he gave up was the first batter of the game as well, and then he proceeded to pick him off of first base. So he really was just doing a fantastic job the entire time. I think one thing, and you pointed this out on Twitter, I want to say, but he's going to the fastball a lot more than the cutter now, and he had started early on with the cutter a lot, pretty heavy usage, and I like the cutter. I think the cutter's a really nice kind of change of pace fastball for him. But the fastball does have really good characteristics. He's spotting it a lot better. He's getting it towards the top of the zone more often. He just, I mean, he really just commanded the ball well. I know he had 3 walks, but for the most part, he wasn't. We talked about he got sent down last time we had just talked, and then he had just been recalled because of the Gasser injury. But we had talked about how he'd get to these 2-strike counts and then just leave a pitch over the middle of the plate. And he just didn't do that. He was much more around the edges, off the plate when he needed to be. He induced a ton of soft contact in this one. It wasn't really a matter of domination on the mound, but it was just doing what he's supposed to do. And you can see how the stuff plays when he can command it like he did in that game. We'll talk about it later, but he had 2 good starts this week. So I think we saw him figure some things out. I think we saw William and the coaching staff and everyone calling pitches figure some things out with him now that he's been up and they're learning more about him and what he's able to do and what he does well. So I think all of that just kind of combined into a really, really good start against an offense that hasn't been great for a while too with the Tigers. But he was fantastic. And frankly, if he hadn't given up that opening hit, he probably was going back out for the 9th because he had 100 pitches at the end of the 8th inning. And if it was for a no-hitter, I think he would have got a chance to go out there. But that'll lead us, I guess, into James Meeker's debut because that's who ended up taking the 9th inning, right, Jack?
Yes, he did. James Meeker, former indie ball legend who has kind of climbed the minor league ranks for the Brewers, sort of quietly, maybe not quietly if your name is Spencer Michaelis, who knows everything about everyone in the minor leagues. But he just kind of kept throwing the ball well at every stop, maybe not garnering a whole lot of attention, but finally got his opportunity to pitch in the big leagues, made his debut in relief of Myers for that 9th inning. A little bit of a shaky start for him, a walk and a single to start things off, but then he was able to get a big inning-ending double play to put up a 0 in his big league debut. Unfortunately, he would be optioned the next day and then eventually designated for assignments to clear a spot on the 40-man roster for Carlos Rodriguez, who would start in that Blue Jays series. But we'll get to that in a little bit here. But nice to see him get an opportunity. It's also exciting to see the Brewers add another member of the Mustache Club to their team between James Meeker and Joey Ortiz. It was a really glorious sight for, I guess, that one day that they were on the roster together. But, one day is better than none. So moving on to game 2 here, the Brewers winning this one by a final of 5-4. We'll start by talking a little bit about Freddie Peralta. We're not going to go into this outing too much because we've talked a lot about Freddie and kind of what the shortcomings for him have been this year. And all we'll say is this outing was basically a perfect example of a lot of the things that we've been talking about lately, just getting ahead of guys and then not executing 2-strike pitches that were anywhere close to the zone. And then that leads to getting ahead 2 strikes on guys, but the plate appearance still ends with a walk or even a hit, or if he does put them away, it's suddenly an 8-pitch strikeout instead of, say, a 4 or 5-pitch strikeout or even 3 pitches. So the line for him in this one, he only went 3 1/3, 4 hits allowed, gave up 4 runs, 3 of them earned, struck out 3 guys, but the 5 walks again is just the standout here. Really no reason that he should have walked 5 guys either with a lot of the counts that he was in. A little bit concerningly as well, the velocity dropped for him in the 3rd inning. We saw the fastball all the way down to 88 against Zach McKinstry to start that inning. And it did bounce back a little bit after a mound visit after that at bat. But still, the highest I think he topped out at the rest of the way was 94, whereas he was sitting 95, touching 96 early on in the game. Fred keeps insisting that he was just trying to get the ball over the plate and command it a little bit better, and he was taking something off to do that. And maybe he's right. He's thrown his side session since then, and all the reports from everyone whenever we ask is he's fine. It was just that he was trying to take something off. That's what Freddie's telling everyone right now. So we'll kind of see how things unfold. I don't want to speculate about anything, but everything that we've heard so far is the health is fine. He was just trying to aim it more. But even if that's all that's going on, I don't like that either.
No.
I mean, it's 2024 in Major League Baseball. No one's instructing guys to take a lot of, in Freddie's case, take a lot off. I mean, if you're going down to 88 from 95, 96, that's taking a lot off. No one's asking guys to do that, to throw more strikes. We play in an era of baseball now where it's just go with your best stuff at all times to try to get outs. And I know you have to pace yourself a little bit as a starting pitcher, and that's a little bit of a different discussion because, yes, velo will drop if you're stretched out more and you're just trying to get through a game, but not because you're not throwing with intensity the whole game. And in Freddie's case, if he's really taking that much off to get in the strike zone, he's not in a good spot to begin with if that's what he's trying to do now, and that's his proposed solution to trying to get through the rest of that game. Wouldn't you say so, Spencer?
Yeah, 100%. I think even beyond that, aiming, quote unquote, aiming makes, for the most part, pitchers throw more balls or they command the ball worse when they do that because they get out of their mechanics. It's a different delivery than what they've been doing for, rep after rep after rep all the way through their major league career. And now you're kind of changing things up and purposely slowing stuff down. Like, it doesn't help in any regard. And he was still throwing a lot of balls while he was dropping his velo down. So I don't think it was really helping him get back in the zone more. I know it is a common thing for pitchers to believe that that will help them get back into the zone, but you would think a vet major league pitcher would know better than that. So it does still leave you a little bit concerned that something might have been bothering him. But again, we don't want to speculate too much on that. Either way, yeah, it was hard to watch. That was probably the hardest Freddie start to watch in a long time for me. Like, it was just, he looked, even when the velo was there, he just didn't look good. He was doing exactly, like you said, what we had talked about last week. And then when the velo started dropping, it just was like, we need to get him out. Like, I was surprised he was back out there in the 4th inning in some ways. Like, he didn't look like he should be going back out for the 4th. And I get that they wanted to try and get him through it, but man, it was just a tough watch. Hopefully that gets left in the past. He'll be making another start soon, and we'll find out hopefully if everything's okay. But yeah, that was just, it was one of the harder starts for any pitcher the Brewers have made this year for me to watch. It was just not fun.
Yeah. As of now, as we're recording this, Freddie is listed on the probables for the upcoming series against the Reds to finish off the current homestand. So it looks like we will be seeing him again, and there don't seem to be any issues that have cropped up, or at least anything that's been shared with anyone that's cropped up. So we're just going to work under the assumption that everything's fine, and it really was just him trying to get through that outing. As the saying goes, though, baseball is a team sport, and the rest of Freddie's team did a nice job picking him up in this one because the Brewers would go on to win. They really started to chip away in the 3rd inning a little bit, and the play that I want to touch on here that I really thought was key to this whole thing was Christian Yelich hitting a sac fly in the 3rd inning. Obviously, that plate's a run, but Bryce Terang, who's on second base for that play, tagged up and went to 3rd. And that's not something that you're going to see just anyone do on a sac fly, especially the one that Yelich hit, because it wasn't super deep. I mean, This is not a play that you're going to see most guys take up to third on. You're just going to hold at second. But that was big because he scored then from third on the very next play, which was a Willie Adames ground out. And if he's on second base, he's obviously definitely not advancing then at that point because the ground ball was hit to the left side. So that play brought the Brewers within 4-3. So at that point, it's a 1-run deficit, and that's what really set up Jackson Churio's double off Shelby Miller in the 6th inning to be the go-ahead and eventually game-winning double. I also want to touch on that play too. Really sneaky, awesome base running by Blake Perkins on that play as well, as long as we're on the base running front. He scored from first on that play, and Churio did hit it in the gap technically, but that's also still not a standard batted ball where you're going to see someone going first to home. Again, hit to the left side, and it was in the gap, but not something where, Perkins is, or most runners are going to have that amount of time to round the bases. And that's one where it was close at the plate too. But because Perkins got such a good jump off first base, because he was hustling, because he was cutting base as well, all of that combined, he was able to score on that play, and it was a really big deal. So just really good base running for the Brewers in this game. And this is really what won it for them, in my opinion.
Yep. Agreed. It was even, I'll go back to the play before Turang tagged up to third. Contreras hit that pop-up into shallow right, and it ended up being Colt Keith and whoever the right fielder was on that day running into each other. But the first thing I noticed is the ball dropped immediately right to Gio Urshela. And I was thinking, oh man, they're just going to throw to second here and get Turang. There wasn't even a throw made, which to me, they never showed a replay. My guess is the pitcher was probably backing up third base, so he wasn't covering up first, so Bryce could get way off the base. But it's still something where a lot of guys might not have been putting themselves in a good position to get to second base on that play, despite the pitcher not covering it up. So he gets the second on that, then he takes third, and he even said he read the throw being a little bit high. I mean, the third baseman caught the ball probably 5 feet from third base. He was in a cutoff position, but that throw that's a really hard read, and it takes the speed that Turang has too to be able to make it. But I mean, that was just fantastic. And like you said on Perkins, obviously 2 outs, he takes off on the crack of the bat. And yeah, they showed the replay of that one from like the overhead on TV. He could not have been cutting those bases any cleaner than he did. Like, it was the perfect route. And credit to Jason Lane on the send on that one too. That's a tough send. It was kind of a read. You could tell he was trying to see if, I think it was Malloy who was in left for that one for the Tigers, and he took like an extra step as he was turning, and I think that was when Lane decided to give him the windmill. And yeah, it ended up being a close play, but it was still pretty easily in there. He got in there without a tag. So yeah, just fantastic. Those 2 plays absolutely won them this game, and kind of another example of what we talked about with the offense finding ways to win. It's not just the batting portion of that. The base running plays a big role in that type of stuff too. And they created multiple runs there that just weren't there for most teams or most players on the bases. And in a 1-run game, that's the difference.
Final shout out for this game. Really nice work by the bullpen as well in relief of Freddie Peralta, Jared Koenig, Enoli Paredes, Brian Hudson, Yoel Payamps, and Trevor McGill combining for 5 2/3 scoreless innings of relief to bring this one home. Game 3, the Brewers, fortunately already having wrapped up the series win here, would not be able to secure a sweep in Game 3 because the Tigers essentially flipped the script from Game 1. They scored 10 in this one, Milwaukee just 2. First storyline from this one, though, was William Contreras finally getting a day off. Pat Murphy tried it again. He said Contreras did not fight him on it this time. Kind of understood that it was, in fact, time for a day. And that brings us to our first question of the episode. Lucas asked us, what's wrong with William Contreras? And what he means is what's wrong with the production, not anything health related. But William obviously has been playing a lot this year. And the last 17 games, so you're talking about 2.5 weeks here now, the last 17 games since May 25th, basically, the numbers have really taken a dip from where they were to begin the year. And just to give you some context here, Contreras entered May 25th slashing 337, 412, 538. That's a 950 OPS. He had a 396 batting average on balls in play, while also running a ground ball rate of 50%. So that's not going to hold up, obviously. You can give Contreras credit for the production that he put in so far, but no matter how you slice it, it's not sustainable. Even if you make the argument that it was still a deserved result, and I think it was closer to a deserved result than overperformance, because you look at the quality of the at-bats he was having, the kind of swings he was putting on the ball, and the way he was adjusting to game plans from pitchers and adjusting his swing to go with different pitches. I don't think it was an undeserved level of production that he was at before, but it's also not sustainable. So you're seeing a little bit of that happen already. But now since May 25th, he's slashing 219, 240, 260. That is a 500 OPS. The batting average on balls in play is down to 276, which again is lower than where you'd expect it to sit. But obviously the production has really cratered here the last few weeks. And I don't think it's alarming or anything, because it is still a fairly small sample. We're still under a month's worth of plate appearances here where it's really been this bad for him. But we're going to dive into it a little bit here for the sake of the question. I rounded some numbers up. So when Contreras was really hitting the ball well, and really before this streak started, in that aforementioned stretch, he had an 11% walk rate, 19% strikeout rate, about an 18% line drive rate. And the big one for me is the 22.6% chase rate. Since May 25th, that's now down to a 3% walk rate and a 30% chase rate. So he's obviously offering at more pitches that just are not in his wheelhouse. I think that can be a little bit of a product of just you're pressing a little bit. Maybe once you see the results start to dry up, you're expanding your strike zone more than you need to. You're going after pitches that you're not going to be able to hit. As far as the quality of contact goes, that ground ball right now during this stretch is up to 67%, which is just way too high. You're not going to have positive results when those are the kinds of batted balls you're hitting. But when you look at the actual mechanics of the swing here, this is what I was a little bit more interested to see as well. We have StatCast bat tracking now, so we can kind of look into some splits for just hitters who are on cold streaks like this. And I think this is a really interesting application of some of this data now, because now we can actually kind of get a somewhat more solidified picture of what the swing is actually looking like as soon as the results start to disappear. So before May 25th, Contreras had a 74.7 mile per hour average swing speed, which is near the top of the league. And his fast swing rate, according to StatCast, was about 52%. His average swing length was 7.3 feet. Since May 25th, the bat speed on average is actually up a little bit, 75.2 miles an hour. But again, you're kind of splitting hairs there, so I'd be willing to just call it even. It's essentially been the same. The fast swing rate is actually up to 57% during this stretch, and the swing length is about the same. This is kind of interesting to parse through, because given what we know about what often makes Contreras so successful as a hitter, I don't think that the higher fast swing rate is actually a good thing. I think on the surface level, you might just be tempted to say, oh, it's more fast swings. Obviously, that means the swing's in a good spot. Well, sometimes what you see William do is just adjusting based on the pitcher, the pitch type he thinks could be coming, or just what he sees out of the hand, the game situation. And he does have at bats where he shortens the swing up and just kind of shoots one the other way, or just pokes a hit out there. So if you're seeing more fast swings, that kind of leads me to believe he's not doing that as much, which in his case is not a good thing. Is that kind of a similar read to what you're getting, just hearing me read off some of these numbers?
Yep. Funny enough, we didn't really talk about this, but I did a very similar dive into what I looked at very similar numbers. I actually did go the last month for mine, so it's a little bit different time frame, but the main thing, and honestly, this was kind of interesting to me. I was looking at how he was performing on ground balls, and I wanted to see if there was any difference in any of that type of stuff. The launch angle is down 3 degrees from where it was for the first month and a half. So it's probably, that usually means it's not a huge difference, but there's probably more choppers included in these rather than actual ground balls. The expected batting average is only 20 points lower, but the actual batting average is about 120 points lower on grounders. So to me, that's a big part of this too. I think I don't want to say there was some luck necessarily, because I'll get to that in a second here, but his pull rate on ground balls is much higher than it was early in the season. And if you think back to the beginning of the season, he was getting a lot of opposite field ground ball singles, and teams never stopped kind of shifting him towards at least the second baseman pretty much always has stayed near the middle of the field. So that spot is still very open for him, but he's pulling the ball on the ground more often now, and that's where the defense is set up for him. So I think the expected batting average, I know the expected batting average doesn't factor in horizontal, like where it's hit horizontally. It only factors in the vertical launch angle. So that not changing a ton isn't shocking to me, but I do think that's a big part of it, is that these are pulled grounders rather than opposite field grounders. And he is slugging worse on, I looked at the fly balls and line drives too, and that's all down as well. But in terms of like hard hit rate and everything, it's not. So I don't think it's a huge concern right now, but I do agree with what you're saying. I think there's almost a level of less confidence or a less adjustability in the swing right now, and he's more just selling out to try and hit the ball hard. And that would also make sense with the pulled ground balls. Like when you're doing that, you tend to roll over or pull off the ball a little bit more often. So I think that's where it's at right now. I wouldn't say I'm concerned at all, really, with William. I think some time off would help too. I hope that day off kind of helps him reset a little bit and all of that. But it's not like you're seeing this drastic, terrible difference in a lot of these numbers. It's more just he's kind of gotten into a funk, I think, more than anything else. And good hitters have that happen. He's a good hitter. I would imagine he's going to get it turned around soon. And yeah, the only other big difference I noticed was the walk rate being down like 7% in that time, which again kind of points to a guy who's just swinging more and trying to do more than he was early in the season. So yeah, that's all I had.
Yeah, I think just overall, to kind of provide a more succinct answer to Lucas's question, a lot of the trends that we just talked about, I don't think any of it is indicative of some larger trend that's taking place that anyone should be worried about. I think it all just points to it's a guy who's in a little bit of a funk right now, maybe could use a physical and a mental break to kind of get back to where he was earlier in the year. Like guys aren't just going to change their offensive identity on a whim willingly after you have success like that. So it's just a guy who's in a little bit of a funk for 2.5, almost 3 weeks here now. I think we'll see it get turned around soon. Just kind of the idea here with everything we talked about is to get more into just what's happening. And the reason we talk about it again is not to indicate that there are trends here that we need to be worried about, like this is the new norm for him, but just kind of diving into here's more of the specifics of what's going on right now. Not that it's going to continue to happen. So we'll see William Contreras get back on the horse and start to produce a little bit again. And there was always going to be some level of coming back down to earth, kind of like what we touched on a few minutes ago. But I'm very much of the opinion that he needs more time off than he's been getting this year. It's hard to really know for sure how much that factors in. There's no way to really quantify it, especially if you're kind of on the outside looking in. Like the only person who really knows how William Contreras feels 100% is William Contreras. But I think they do need to find a way to maybe balance the playing time out just a little bit more. And maybe this is kind of what he needed to see to realize, yeah, maybe I do need to take a little bit more time. Because a lot of the driving force just behind this streak of games played he had going was William. He's a competitor and he wants to be out there every day, which kudos to him for having that mentality. Give me, 26 guys who all have that mentality, but sometimes it then becomes a job of Pat Murphy and the rest of the coaching staff and the medical staff and all of these guys to kind of step in and, maybe set a little bit of a boundary on him and say, hey man, like we appreciate the effort and the mindset, but we're doing this for everyone's benefit here. But getting back to the actual series finale here, we'll kind of breeze through this quick. Bryce Wilson was actually, through the first 4 innings of this one, if the outing had stopped after that point, I would have said this was by far Bryce Wilson's best start of the year, just in terms of actually executing pitches and getting the kind of outcomes you want. He was actually getting a lot of swing and miss in those middle innings of that start. He gave up a run in the first, started a little slow, but innings 2 through 4, really sharp. And unfortunately, the final line, I don't think it really fully reflected how he pitched. This is kind of interesting. We'll run through the inning here. There was an 8-run 5th inning for the Tigers, and that was essentially where all of the damage came from in this one, or most of it at least. The inning started off with a bunt single. Wilson then hit Mark Canha for the second time that afternoon, which it really wasn't a pitch that was that far off the plate. This is just kind of what Mark Canha does. We saw him do it all the time for the Brewers this year, and it was a very big boost for the Brewers. So, people can complain about it if they want to. I'm not going to gatekeep that, but, just a little bit of perspective. He did it here, and I'm sure everyone enjoyed watching him do it while he was here. So this is just kind of how he plays the game, and make of that what you will. And honestly, like you've kind of talked about, Spencer, like, you can give him a little bit of credit for being willing to lean into it. He does wear the protective gear, though, which is also part of this.
So do a lot of players, though. He's still the one wearing them.
Right. But after that hit by pitch, that's when Wilson really started to fall apart. His next 3 batters walk, single, walk, the only 2 walks for him in the afternoon. Hobie Milner then came in at that point, and he threw a 2-strike sweeper to, I believe it was McKinstry. Don't quote me on that.
Yep, I believe so.
It was McKinstry, but it was essentially in the right-handed batter's box, like over the chalk and low, and he just kind of stuck the bat out there and flipped a cheap single into left. So that you can't really pin that on Hobie either. But then Hobie gave up a base hit and a home run. That one you can pin on Hobie, but just kind of a lot of different things going wrong for the Brewers in that inning, and that's kind of what has to happen if you're going to give up 8 in a single frame there. But the final line for Bryce Wilson, 4 1/3, 6 hits, 7 earned runs, 2 walks, 4 Ks. And the funny thing about this one is I actually think even if you look at that outing on the whole for Wilson, I still think overall just how he threw the ball, that was one of his better starts of the year. And a lot of times so far this year, especially since he's moved into the rotation, he's had outings where I don't think he's thrown the ball well, and he's just skated by with a 5-inning 2-run or a 5-inning 3-run or a 4-inning 1-run or whatever. Especially like if you look at the Cardinals start is the one that I keep coming back to, where he was just walks, hit by pitches, guys on base, traffic every inning, and then he'd get out of it on a rocket that finds someone's glove. I actually thought that this was probably about as well as he threw the ball all season. Ironically, this is the one where the results were the worst that they've been all year, but this to me is just a classic regression start. Like the numbers, the results start to come back, and now they line up a little bit more closely with what all of the peripherals were telling us about Bryce Wilson's performance so far this year. Not a lot of swing and miss, way too many walks, a good amount of loud contact. Like that's the formula of a guy who maybe you can get by with him as a number 5, but he's a much better fit for the bullpen. His stuff is a much better fit for the bullpen. I actually think he's a solid reliever. But just the Brewers are making do with what they have. So I think that's just kind of the best way to frame it there. Moving on then to the Toronto Blue Jays series, the Brewers coming back home and securing another 2 games out of 3 series victory. This was the sixth, excuse me. It's hard to say sometimes with the enunciation. The 6th straight home series win for the Brewers. And this one started out in grand fashion. Game 1, the Brewers winning a low-scoring affair, 3-1. We got the best Colin Ray start that we have ever seen. It was a treat for all who were in attendance or watching from home. 7 innings from Colin Ray, 3 hits allowed, and the only run he gave up was a solo shot to Alejandro Kirk in the 3rd inning. Struck out 4 guys. Probably could have gotten the 8th, too. I was hoping he'd get the 8th because the pitch count, I believe it was still below 90 when he finished up the 7th inning. He was extremely efficient in this one, just doing a really good job pounding the zone. He did a really good job as well with the glove side sinker in this one. He got a lot of called strikes on that pitch, and that was big for him as well. I kind of asked him about that post game, and he said, yeah, we really established that location with that pitch well. But just a solid Colin Ray outing. Not a ton of swing and miss, but he threw strikes, let the defense do the work. And I kind of noticed this just going through the game, and it kind of popped into my head, and I tweeted about it the next day. But I really think that Colin Ray and the Brewers are the perfect fit for each other right now. Like the pitcher, who he is as a pitcher, what he has as far as defensive resources and pitching development resources in Milwaukee, and then also what the Brewers need right now, which is just innings. All of it goes really well together because Colin Ray on a lot of other teams is probably not going to have the kind of results that he's had as a Brewer. He's got one of the lowest batting averages on balls in play over the last couple of years. He benefits a lot from the defense behind him. The Brewers have still an elite defense, and they haven't even played as well defensively as they did last year. But it's really beneficial for a guy like Colin Ray. And then for his part, he understands what the assignment is. He goes out there every 4-5 days, and it hasn't been perfect every time. He has had a couple outings where he's walked some guys, but still, on the whole, more often than not, he's going to go out there. He's going to mix everything, throw it in the strike zone, usually locate it well enough that it's not all over the heart of the plate. And then he's going to get that contact. The defense is going to do the work behind him. He'll be more efficient than some other guys in this rotation, and that's how he goes 7 innings in this game. And that's how he's just been eating innings for the Brewers all year. We're getting closer to a reality in which Colin Ray potentially leads this team in innings pitched this year, which is a crazy thought to have, but he's done a very, very nice job. Wouldn't you say so, Spencer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like we could name the podcast the Colin Ray Fan Club because we just talk about Colin all the time. But he has been fantastic. Like you said, he understands what he's asked to do, and then he goes out and he does it. And it sounds so simple. It sounds so easy to do that, but it's not. And there's not that many pitchers who can do it at the level he does it. And the Brewers bringing him back, I think they have a club option for next year, if I'm not mistaken, too. So
they do, yes.
It was a really good job on the Brewers' part finding him. He came back from whichever overseas league he was in. I can't remember which one, but
he was in Japan.
He was in Japan, yeah. But like he's changed the way he pitches. He just is able to adjust kind of on the fly in games to what needs to get done. It's impressive. It's somebody that you love to have on your team, even if for this team right now he's like the number 2, but preferably you'd want him at the back of the rotation. But the fact that he's been able to stand in and hold up as a decent enough number 2 is pretty impressive. Like, it's just not something a lot of people can do. And like Jack said, I think Brewers do need to keep in mind that the Brewers organization and the way that they work together as a run prevention unit with the defense is a big reason he's gotten the results he's gotten. But it still comes back to being able to understand that this is what I need to do in order to succeed with this team, and he's doing it. So bunch of credit to him and the Brewers for piecing it together and putting together what right now is a solid major league pitcher.
Yeah. The tempered word of, maybe let's not get too carried away here that I'm going to throw in is all the ERA estimators still have him anywhere from a mid 4s to actually a mid 5s. There's a couple estimators that really don't like him at all. I don't think those are fully capturing the essence of Colin Ray and what he does, but I do think in terms of how he's thrown the ball this year, just the quality of pitches he's making and the level of the stuff, it's probably still, if you're trying to isolate the performance a little more, been closer to 4.5 ERA guy, and we're going to see the results trend that way a little bit sooner than later. Like, if I were a betting man, I would still bet on him finishing with an ERA a decent amount over 4. But again, it comes back to he's also part of a run prevention unit where part of the plan is these are the factors you're hoping together so that he can overperform some of those peripherals. So in terms of, again, what he's being asked to do, he's doing the job. And I think in that sense, kind of seeing where the ERA is at, I do think it to some extent demonstrates he's doing exactly what's asked of him. It's not going to stay there. But no matter how you slice it or how intricate you want to get with that, he goes out and he does his job. And this is a guy who deserves a lot of credit for what he does every time he gets on the mound. So kudos to him. The Brewers, kind of like we talked about, started this game down 1-0 because Ray gave up that early home run, but then they chipped away throughout the game. Jackson Churio and Willie Adames hitting solo home runs, and then the Brewers adding their third run on a sac fly by Adames in the 6th, going on to win 3-1. Game 2, the Brewers dropping this one by a score of 3-0, another low-scoring affair. Like we touched on earlier, Carlos Rodriguez made his MLB debut in this game. And the line for him doesn't look great. It's 3 2/3, 7 hits, 2 earned, a walk, and 4 Ks. Navigated a lot of traffic. But he showed some good things. He escaped a bases loaded jam in the third inning, so demonstrated some poise is the word that Pat Murphy used. Just being able to make some pitches in that spot. When he was executing, especially the four-seamer and the changeup, he was getting swings and misses with those pitches, and that's what really played into the 4 strikeouts. It's a guy who I know he's never been regarded as having great stuff, but like he was throwing 93 to 95 with the four-seamer, and when that's up in the zone from a shorter guy with a 3/4 arm slot, like that's good for vertical approach angle. I was looking at it as he was pitching. His minor league vertical approach angle, I think, would have been in like the top 20 of qualified MLB starters this year. So, like, that's a pitch that can get swing and miss up there. And then the changeup is a really good changeup, too. And that's kind of what he said post game as well. Like, I felt like when I was executing pitches, I was getting the results I wanted. But really, he just, made some mistakes in the zone over the plate. And that's when he got hit around a little bit. But none of it is especially concerning for a 22-year-old making his MLB debut. So that brings us to our next question. Steven Anderson asked, do you prefer Carlos Rodriguez or Aaron Ashby for the rest of the season? I think I'm going to say Carlos Rodriguez.
Yep. Same for me. Just but I do want to talk about it. I don't know that we'll see the same velocity we saw from him in his debut. That was up a bit from where he's been in AAA. But when he does have it up there, because we saw some 96s, it plays. The fastball will play in that when it's up there. And I will say the slider has shown a lot better in the minors than it did in his debut. I think you will see a better slider. The changeup is a touch and go pitch for him. He had it in that debut. When he has it, it's really good. But when he doesn't have it, you'll see him yanking it around a lot and stuff, and it can be kind of iffy. So there were a lot of good signs. He frankly did a little better than I probably expected him to, just in terms of being in and around the zone as often as he was. I thought there would be maybe a bit of a concern with that, despite he had been much better for the last month before he got called up. But yeah, he showed well. And I will say, I guess you can't be too shocked given he was the starting pitcher in the World Baseball Classic against Puerto Rico in Nicaragua's first game a few years ago. And he held his own against a lineup full of major league players, and he looked very comfortable and like nothing was too big for him in that moment. So I wasn't shocked to see the poise, but I was really happy to see him in and around the zone as much as he was. And like you said, he made some mistakes with the fastball, and that's where he gave up a lot of the hits. But either way, it was a good debut from him for sure.
Unfortunately, it was not a good day for the Brewers lineup. They stranded 10 on base and went 0 for 12 with runners in scoring position. That would continue into Game 3, which fortunately was snapped in the later half of that game. The Brewers winning it 5-4, but I guess we'll kind of start on the offensive front. The Brewers stranded the bases loaded twice in the first 4 innings against Chris Bassett, so extending that stretch of not getting hit with runners in scoring position. I don't remember what the final line was, but I believe it got up to 0 for 24 with runners in scoring position between those last 2 games. But they finally broke through with a 5-run 6th inning, and again, it started with the base running of Bryce Terang and Blake Perkins. The Brewers calling for a double steal in that inning with runners on the corners. So you had Terang on first, Perkins on third. Terang breaks, Perkins reads the play, and as the throw's going down, takes off for the plate. And the throw was also not a great one. It ended up skipping into center field, and that cemented for sure that Perkins was going to score. It also allowed Terang to advance to third. And again, just kind of what we've talked about, the ability to apply a little bit of pressure there as well, I think also comes into that equation. But Pat Murphy kind of talked about it post game. He said this was not only something that we know we have in our bag and the ability to do it, but he also said that based on the way they had scouted the Blue Jays defense, the way they had scouted their pitcher-catcher combo, they knew that this was a unit specifically that they could execute this play against and have a chance for them to not really know what to do or not know what to do, but be caught off guard a little bit and kind of be surprised by it and force a throwing error, which is what ultimately happened there. So the Brewers then adding on with singles by William Contreras and Christian Yelich, and then Adames delivered what was ultimately the game-winning blow with a 2-run home run, and the Brewers ended up needing that insurance because we got to the ninth and things got away a little bit. But again, really just that whole sixth inning, just a quintessential Brewers inning because they used all of the balanced facets of their offensive game to put up a big inning. You had the speed and the contact a little bit early on, and you had the singles following that as well after the base running play, and then you had enough power in there as well to make it a big inning because you were able to get that big hit there as well. So just a really good showing in that inning, and again, just kind of encapsulates everything we've been saying about this lineup for probably the past 2 weeks now. And we also got to give more love to Toby Myers again because he, for the second straight start, did a really nice job. 6 innings for him, just 3 hits allowed. The only run he gave up was the second batter of the game, Davis Schneider, took him deep for a solo home run. Only 1 walk for Myers in this game, and he struck out 4. So we started to see, again, a little bit of swing and miss in there as well. But also just the efficiency was really, really good. He was under 70 pitches after he got through those 6th when Pat Murphy went to the pen early. And I was fine with pulling him out early. In Ray's case, I would have liked to see him go one more, but I also didn't really have a problem with that either. This one I had no reservations about because Myers was giving up a little bit more loud contact in this game. He only gave up 3 hits, but there were some loud outs. Yeah. And you had arrested Brian Hudson, and you got an opportunity to win the series here and a day off the following day. Perfect time to be a little bit more aggressive with your bullpen. So I thought Murph played that one perfectly with the way that he managed the pitching unit after that. But again, just Tobias Myers, Spencer, you touched on it when we talked about his first start. The changes to the pitch mix that he's made a little bit lately, going a lot more heavy on the 4-seamer, and instead of really splitting up the fastball usage between the cutter and the 4-seamer, it was basically like 50-50 between those two if he was going to throw a fastball. It's now been a lot more 4-seamer living off that, and then the cutter kind of takes on that supplementary different look role. And I know I wrote about Myers' cutter a few weeks ago about how I thought it was his most important fastball, and I kind of talked to him about it, and he said, yeah, it's a very important part of the arsenal to keep guys off the 4-seamer. And it is still true, but I think right now he's settled on the right usage for it to be that pitch that takes guys off the 4-seamer. I think he was showing it too much early on, but now he's got a good balance going where it's, you'll see a lot of 4-seamers, but you can't quite sit on it because he's got the cutter, but you're also not showing the cutter too much to the point where it just becomes hittable for guys. And I think he's really settled into that balance. I kind of asked him after the game, do you like where the pitch mix is at now? And he said, yeah, I mean, I was throwing a lot of cutters early on, and I think we kind of realized that wasn't really my kind of mix. And that was the first time he had done it. He wasn't throwing that many cutters in Nashville before he got called up. What we're seeing right now is a lot closer to the mix he was using in AAA. And that was a mix that worked really, really, really well for him. And now we're starting to see some results in the big leagues. So it's awesome to see. What was not awesome to see was the Brewers nearly blowing the lead in the 9th inning. Jake Bauers essentially forgot how to first base in that inning. It's probably the best way to put it, but Hobie Milner came out. He threw a scoreless 8th, came out to start the 9th, and the first iffy play was one where it was a ground ball toward first, not directly towards the bag, not like in line with the bag, but it was one that Bauers had a play on, and he went for it at first. He came off the bag, started ranging toward the ball, and I don't know if he suddenly thought that it was actually Bryce Terang who had a better angle on that ball. Hobie was covering first, so he could have made a play. Yeah. He could have picked it up, made the flip. I think he decided that Bryce had a better angle on that ball than he did, because at the last second, Bauers basically peeled off and let that ball roll through, presumably thinking Bryce had a play on it, but Bryce didn't have a play on it. He had to range quite a ways for that one, so that ball ended up squeaking through for a base hit. And then a few pitches after that, basically, we had the opposite thing happen, in which Bauers aggressively went for a ball where he probably should have stayed on the bag. Granted, this was after Trevor McGill came in, and McGill did not cover first, which not the best look on his part. He should have been moving anytime there's a ball hit that direction on the ground. You got to start making your way to first, and he didn't. But also not played the best by Bowers, because that was one where he thought he had a play on it, but that one for sure was Bryce's ball, and Bryce actually got to it and knocked it down, but because there's nobody covering the bag at that point. So that the more I think about it, you can probably split blame for that one between Jake and McGill.
Yeah.
I think McGill not covering on that kind of messed that whole play up the more that I'm talking about it, actually. But either way, just not the best showing for the right side of the infield there in that sequence. And then McGill closed it out with back-to-back hard-hit warning track fly balls to Blake Perkins off the bat of Kirk and pinch hitter Vlad Guerrero Jr. So kind of had to sweat that one out a little bit. That home run by Adames ended up making the difference, but the Brewers able to hold on by a thread. I guess with that, we can now move on to a couple of loose ends, just going over some listener questions that we got this week. We'll start with the first one that we got from John. He asked us on Twitter. This has nothing to do with the series, but going forward, would you rather have Bryce Terang or Joey Ortiz? It can be just for this year, the next 5 years, their careers, just kind of whatever route we want to take it. He thinks it's Ortiz, but he also knows it's still early, and he wants to know kind of which or both, if any, is due to see the most regression. I think if I'm picking one long term, I think it's still Joey Ortiz, just because there's more power there. And for as outlandish as Terang's ranges at second base, I'm not sure he has the arm to play shortstop. And Ortiz does. Ortiz also, I think, has quicker hands than Bryce does, which is not a knock on Bryce, because Bryce also has fast hands. But Ortiz is just like on another level in that territory. So Ortiz is the one who has still, to me, more of the viability to be a very good MLB shortstop. I'm still not quite sure that's there with Bryce. Bryce is, with where he's at now with the offensive profile, even if you're accounting for probably a little bit of offensive regression that I think we're going to see from him throughout the year. I've been saying the whole time since Bryce basically changed his whole profile, like the improvements that he's made in terms of how he hits now and what he's trying to do, those are real. Those are real changes. But I think it's ultimately going to result in more of like a 90 weighted runs created plus type hitter, so slightly below average. But you pair that with top tier defense, he's a very, very good starting second baseman. And then with Joey, there's the very good starting shortstop potential. So just based on that distinction, I'm going to pick Ortiz long term.
Yep. You stole my answer almost word for word. I was going to talk about Ortiz having a bit more power potential, which I think he's just got a much higher ceiling with the bat in general. And then I was going to say the exact same thing. I think Ortiz is the one who can handle short. Like Jack said, it's more the arm for Terang that won't be able to hold up at shortstop for me. And both of them, I think, have good range. I think you would see the range a bit more if Ortiz wasn't on a corner where you don't really have as much of an opportunity to show off the range. But I think he's going to be the shortstop of the future. And for me, that's just a more valuable spot to have. But I'm certainly happy to have both. And I'm, again, happy to admit that Terang has proven me wrong in a lot of ways this year. And I do believe he's a good, solid MLB player now. So I won't complain about having either of them, but I'll go Ortiz long term.
Yeah, again, that's the final takeaway from this one. You don't have to pick one because the Brewers are going to have both.
Yep.
And between those two, you're talking about hopefully a long-term middle infield that is combining for, around 8 wins, if not more, every year. And that's really exciting to think about. Tyler Labs asked, and this was actually, I think, my favorite question that we got this week. He asks, as a fan, what's your favorite seat section to sit in at American Family Field? Curious, given the perspectives you watch games with, what vantage point gives you the most unadulterated feedback? So I really like sitting behind the plate.
Yep.
At baseball games. Is that what you were going to say?
Sort of. Go with yours, and then I'll do mine.
Okay. So I like sitting behind the plate at baseball games just because that gives you the best view of how pitcher's stuff is looking. Like it's by far the best way to see it. But I don't like sitting on field level because especially if you're behind the plate on field level, it's really challenging to see outfield positioning and to judge like depth. Like you don't know if there's a fly if you're sitting behind the plate and there's a fly ball hit really to any spot in the outfield, but especially like to center, you really don't know for sure where that ball is actually being caught. You don't know if he's on the warning track or if he's still on the grass. Like you can tell in broader terms if he's shallow or a little bit deeper, but you don't know for sure because you're on the same level as him basically. So I really like being behind the plates on the loge level because then it's that same vantage point of you can granted it hurts a little bit with seeing how the stuff is playing, but I think it gives you the best compromise between you're still right behind the plate so you can see movement pretty well, but you're also up a little bit so you can see the whole field and you can gauge depth a little bit better and all those different things. I think that's the best angle for me. So I guess I don't have a specific seat section for you, but loge level behind home plate.
Yep. You stole it again. I thought you were going to go with the field level, and I was going to be like, oh, close, but I'm loge.
No,
But I agree with
I
everything
don't
you
like
said.
sitting. I mean, it's
It's a cool experience
to be that close, but
yeah.
in terms of actually seeing stuff, I don't like field level that much.
No, I'm 100% with you. Back in the day when the Brewers were really bad and tickets, no matter where you sat, you could get on StubHub for like $5. I was sitting there every single game, just perfect spot to see everything in action. And when I was younger, especially, I was there to watch like specific players sometimes because I wanted to learn from them as a player. So like that was perfect for that too. So that's where I would say is as far up as you can be in that section, like first few rows of the loge level right behind the plate. Like that's my ideal spot if I'm sitting anywhere for a game.
Steven Anderson asked us, any chance the Sal Frelick third baseman experiment gets rejuvenated due to the emergence of Perkins, Churio's upswing, and Mitchell's return? I think so. I'm still of the opinion that it's not going to last very long if they do it. Like that's kind of been the take I've had since they had Sal start working out at third. Like they're going to try to make it happen. They're serious about it. But I don't think that with the way everything's going to end up kind of unfolding with whether it's injuries or player production, that we're going to see hardly any of Sal at third beyond maybe just a brief run there before everything kind of shakes out and he ends up back in the outfield. But the Brewers, for whatever reason, they really like Garrett Mitchell. They really like Garrett Mitchell. They want him to be the starting center fielder, or at least a starting outfielder, I should say. And I should also, I'm not saying this like with, insider information to fully confirm that, but I'm just going off of kind of how we've seen them handle him. And every indication has always been we want him playing every day against righties for sure in the outfield. He was the first one to get the call up. He was in the running to be the leadoff hitter this year before the injury. So he's going to get playing time. And now Pat Murphy he's said this multiple times within the last week that they're thinking of keeping it to a really short rehab assignment in Nashville and then bringing him back up even sooner than you might otherwise to just get him into games here and continue building him up in the big leagues. The day we're recording this on Thursday night, he was assigned to Nashville. He's going to start playing there. And they've been targeting the Angels series on the start of the next road trip. So that's only like 4 or 5 days out from where we are now. The 17th, a little less than because we're recording on the 13th. But so, yeah, you're basically looking at, just a few at-bats for him. But we'll kind of see what happens there. But it seems like they want to get him back in the outfield in Milwaukee as soon as they can. And you also can't, at this point especially, I don't think you can move Blake Perkins back to the bench. I think there's always a chance that the offense starts to decline again a little bit, and then you could maybe have a better argument for doing it. But with how he's playing right now, you need to continue taking advantage that he's near the top of NL outfielders in WAR right now. You can't really put that guy on the bench. And I still don't want Churio to get option. I still want him to play up here because I still fully believe he has nothing to gain from going to Nashville. unless it's maybe more regular at bats. But even then, like he's not going to gain anything from facing that caliber of competition. So he needs to be up here. So I think between all of that, could see more of Sal at third. We are starting to trend back to kind of where I was about a month ago, which was keep Jackson up and send Sal to Nashville.
Yeah.
Just to see if we can start seeing some semblance of power or loud contact. He's never going to be a power hitter, and he's never a guy I want elevating the ball because of how he's built. Like it's always going to be about getting on base a lot for him and using the speed again. But at least to the point where you're hitting some well-struck line drives.
Yes.
To accomplish that, and that's what we're not seeing from him. Granted, he got hot for like a week or two there, but now the OPS is trending back down. Him and Chourio are actually closing in on each other for OPS right now. So, I mean, if we get another week of this where Chourio continues swinging really well and Sal doesn't do a whole lot, suddenly you're looking at Chourio does look like the more viable MLB option at this point. So it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds. But I do think we could see Sal at third a little bit in the near future.
Yeah, I would echo pretty much everything you said. I do think the one part that makes it kind of tough is that Ortiz has pretty major reverse platoon splits so far this year. He's hit righties really well. So getting him, like putting Sal at third over him on a given day other than just a rest day wouldn't make a ton of sense. But I do think just in terms of ability to move guys around, him getting some time at third again would be the more important part there. And having the ability to maybe not roster an Oliver Dunn at the moment and instead have Frelick as the guy who can go play third if you need to move. Say Adames has to come out, Ortiz goes to short, or Ortiz has to come out, he goes to third. Like, it just gives you a lot more flexibility to have him available to do that. But I don't know that it would be something where you would ever want him getting any sort of regular at bats at third base. It'd just be more for the ability to make moves on the fly during a game.
Yeah, that's what I should have said too. Like it'd be part of a rotation. Like it would be an option to kind of keep shuffling guys through and try to make sure everyone gets playing time. It like would be a situation where the lineup's going to look a little different night to night, but the end result is like everyone's getting at bats. And I think that's really the function that it would serve. Smiling Ghosts asked us, what are some boring depth trades the Brewers could make? Some examples he threw out there. Ahmed Rosario to back up the infield. The averagest sinker slider starting pitcher available. Would love that for the Brewers. They could use that right now. Something that will get no one excited but could fill a need, basically, is what he's asking for. Got any names off the top of your head, Spencer? I didn't do any research for this question, full disclosure.
I tried to a little bit. I don't know how boring they are to us, but they'd probably be boring to a lot of people. We talked about them on one of the episodes, actually, when we got a trade question, but like a Paul Blackburn type guy would be a nice solidifier for the rotation. I don't think I think he's probably got a little bit more in the tank than he's shown in terms of like his results, but he wouldn't be somebody that everyone would be thrilled with. And I bet people would probably be a little upset with the price that he ends up costing at the time, because I don't think he would be super cheap. But that's the type of guy I was looking at. Maybe Cal Quantrill from the Rockies, but he's actually having a solid year, so people would probably be somewhat excited about him. So I don't know. In terms of boring trades, I do think you're probably looking at just a guy who eats innings for a starter at some point. I think there's a pretty decent chance of something like that happening, but those are the only two names I could really come up with that I don't think a ton of people either know or love, and I think would actually help a little bit.
I keep going back to the possibility of Jose Quintana being a Brewer at the deadline. I think that's one that you could see him swing, just because I know you don't like it, but it's just kind of the kitchen sink guy.
He doesn't get to face the Brewers then, though, Jack. That's where he really boosts his numbers.
Right. But it's like the kitchen sink arsenal. He's had some recent success, but the results have been really bad this year. But kitchen sink guy, not a great strikeout rate, but you bring him in and hope the defense helps everything play up. What I come back to as well is the Mets are going to be selling this year. And Quintana's definitely not on the top of anyone's list, but I think he's realistic for the Brewers because the price will be lower. And again, he is kind of the guy, like I said, who could maybe play up with this defense behind him. Maybe they can tweak some things with the pitch mix. You hope that maybe he gets ground balls at a decent clip, and that helps as well. But also, when you're trading with the Mets, I think there's a decent chance that they'd be willing to cover a lot of the money that's left on the deal yet. He's going to be a free agent after this year, so he'll be a rental. But the annual value of that deal is $13 million, and I think that New York would be willing to cover a decent amount of that. We've seen them do that over the last year or so with trades, and I just think it's the right boring mix of, he's not great, but he can help us fill some innings. We can get him for a reasonable price tag, both by way of prospects and finances. I could see it happening. That's the name I'm probably going to keep coming back to. So not exciting for anyone. I don't even think it's exciting. But like I could see that happening.
Yeah.
Michael asks us a question about Jackson Chourio, who we were just talking about. Is Chourio following the standard path of a slow start at a new level, followed by figuring it out? I think so. We won't go too much into detail because we've kind of touched on some aspects of that. I guess we've never fully framed it like this, but yeah, it's just comes back to a lot of he's hitting the mistakes and struggling against the pitcher's pitches. And now we have started to see a little bit of a shift where he is getting closer to hitting some of the pitcher's pitches. The pitch that he doubled on in Detroit was a fastball up and in from Shelby Miller, which we haven't really ever seen him get to in the big leagues so far yet. And then the home run that he hit, the last one he hit against Toronto was against Jose Barrios. And it wasn't, I'm not going to say it was a well-located breaking ball because it probably shouldn't have caught the strike zone, but it was lower third of the zone and outer third of the zone. So it was the first time that he homered on a breaking ball where he had to kind of wait a little bit and reach for it more. And he stayed on it really well and homered on that pitch. So that was encouraging to see as well. All the other home runs he did on breaking balls were ones that were either up and in or right down the middle. But this one he had to stay with a little bit more and stay down on it, and he did that. So yeah, I do think he is kind of filling that not natural, but standard development path that you're asking about, where it's pretty stereotypical struggles that you would expect to see from a young guy at a new level. And now it's hopefully starting to click a little bit. There are some signs that he's getting closer to figuring it out.
Yeah. He's starting to play with a little bit more of the swag that you saw in the minors too, where he takes a close pitch and he's nodding along with it and looks at the ump and is like, oh, is that, he's doing a lot more where he just looks comfortable to me. And having watched him a lot in the minors, you could see that was missing at times, especially he had it at the beginning of the season. He started struggling and he kind of got away from that. And it's not shocking. You also don't want to be that guy that's up there with a 500 OPS who's looking like an idiot, smiling and nodding every time he takes a close pitch. But I just think he's definitely getting more comfortable, and you're starting to see the results in honestly the field and at the plate he's being more aggressive going after fly balls in the outfield. You can tell he's a little more confident in what he's seeing at the plate. So yeah, I think you're just kind of seeing the progression of what it takes for a guy would be one of the youngest players at AA and AAA right now. Like he's 20 years old. So it's about the time he started figuring things out at AA last year, and I think he's starting to put some things together right now.
On the confidence front, I keep going back to just the conversation that Freddie Peralta had with him a few weeks ago. That really seemed like it was the turning point. And I know we've been fairly harsh on Freddie just with the on-field performance, but he has very much developed into a clubhouse leader for this team, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. And just, the conversation he had with Jackson was a really good example of that, and I think that helps a lot. So, just good on him for taking that step, and I think we're seeing the fruits of that already. As long as we're on the topic of young players, that's the perfect time for us to transition to Spencer's favorite portion of the program, Spencer's Minor League Sandbox. And I'm going to stick in here for a couple minutes because the first question is one that I have some thoughts on. So you want to take it away?
Yeah, we got our first question from Cheesehead Kami. Great name, by the way. Do you think Jake Misiorowski can ever improve his control to a point where he can start games for the Brewers? So, Jack, I know you wanted in on this, and I'm going to talk a lot in the next few minutes. So, what do you got on this one?
I'm going to say no. And Well, I guess part of the reason I'm saying no is because I also think it's going to tie into just the trajectory I expect his career to take and the role he's going to be filling. I'm not going to rule it out completely that if you gave him enough time, like an infinite amount of time to figure out the control enough to start, that he couldn't do it, because maybe he can. But I think the development for him is going to end with the Brewers biting the bullet on starting and he just becomes a reliever. I'm going to go as far to say I don't think he's ever going to start a game for the Brewers. I think he's very likely to take the Josh Hader route. You look at what he's doing in Biloxi this year. Spencer, you probably are more up to date on this than I am, but the last time I checked, he was at like 7 walks per 9.
Yep.
In Biloxi. Is it still that high? Okay.
Yeah.
If you want to get Jacob Misiorowski into the big leagues in the near future, it's out of the bullpen. The stuff is good enough right now to be a good MLB reliever. And I think what you're going to see happen is the Brewers are going to say, look, man, we're better off getting him to the big leagues instead of stretching that minor league development timeout. And when he gets here, it's going to be out of the bullpen. And I think you're going to either one of two things happen. One, he gets up here as a reliever, and just the lack of consistency and lack of command is so bad that even there the results aren't good. And obviously, if the results are not good out of the bullpen of the big leagues, you're not going to put him into a big league rotation. Or number two, he's lights out of the bullpen with the fastball slider combination, runs a high walk rate, but gets away with it because he strikes so many guys out in the short stints and, the working through traffic and more base runners. That doesn't hurt you if you're only going, 2 innings most of the time, or even 1 inning. Like, that's not going to prevent you from doing your job. And then at that point, if he's throwing that well out of the bullpen and he's providing value for you in that capacity, you're not going to say, well, let's send him back to Biloxi or back to Nashville to continue working as a starter. Because at that point, he's already providing value for you, and you're probably not going to want to make that trade-off of sending him back down to try to develop him for a different role, which is essentially what the Josh Hader conundrum was. He got up to the big leagues, threw really well as a reliever, but in 2017, Josh Hader did not profile as an MLB-ready starter with where the Arsenal and the Command were at, and the Brewers decided, let's just leave him in the bullpen instead of run the risk of either he starts in the big leagues and things don't work out, or we have to send him back to the minor leagues to continue developing as a starter. So I think that's the route we're going to see with Jacob Misiorowski. I think it's really, it comes down to, I guess, it would take a very long time for him to ever get that control. And I don't think the Brewers give him that time. So if I had to guess, it's going to be exclusively a career as a reliever, especially for his time with the Brewers.
Yeah, I am on the same page. That's kind of the answer I've given any time has asked me. I've said, I think he's probably 2+ years away from being a starter, if you even get to that point. And I think he could pitch in the bullpen this year. And like Jack said, it seems like it'll be very reminiscent of the Hader problem, I guess, if you want to call it a problem, where I would bet he has pretty good results. I think his stuff will be up. It'll be up a tick out of the bullpen. We saw it in the Futures game when he got a chance to go in a shorter outing. I don't think you'll end up, I think he'll be more valuable in a 2-inning relief stint type of role than he will be as a guy who's probably a 5-and-dive starter, even if he does figure everything out, because there's still going to be some semblance of control issues and command issues. And his best case scenario could be like a dominant 5 to 6 inning starter, maybe, but that's a long ways down the road. And I think there's a pretty good chance he evens out more in the middle, and he's just kind of a guy that has the potential to do really well, but also is all over the place and then ends up falling into a pen role later anyways. And I think we'd rather just have him dominating for the next couple of years if he does come up and is able to at least throw enough strikes like I think he will in that role. I kind of am with you where I would not be surprised at all if we never see him make a start for the Brewers other than, some opener thing or something, but a true start for the Brewers. So yeah, I think we're definitely on the same page there. And then we did have one other question. I think this is where Jack,
you can do the rest of this. I've said my piece about minor leaguers, so knock
all
yourself
right.
out.
Finally, we did get another question from Kami on the same subject, kind of. He said, kind of along those lines, who is your second favorite pitching prospect in the Brewer system? He says his personally is Logan Henderson. Quickly, I guess I should talk about Logan Henderson did make his Double-A debut this past weekend. He went 5 shutout innings, 1 walk, 3 strikeouts. Not nearly the same level of swing and miss as he was getting at the lower levels, but he looked like he belonged. And the velo is still sticking as he continues to make starts, the velo jump he made. So that's really good to see. He would be up there with my answers, but I'm going to go a different route. Mine's maybe not the safest pick. There's a lot of room between the floor and the ceiling here, but I'm going with Bishop Letson, the Brewers' 10th round pick last year. Every time I watch him, he moves up my list. I think he has the second highest ceiling of any pitcher in the Brewers system right now, including guys like Josh Noth, and that's probably the other one, huge ceiling. But this is a guy who's 19. He's throwing 93 to 95. That's where he's sitting on the fastball. He's topped at 98 already. He has the most extension on a fastball in all of low A. So that 95, that mid 90s or upper 90s is getting on you even faster than what it says. He has a good slider and a good changeup. I think his command is a lot better than what his walk numbers are showing right now. I just think there's huge potential. And I genuinely think I could make the argument for him having the highest potential to actually stick as a starter and be able to have like a legitimate close to the top of the rotation type of abilities in his repertoire. So that's who I'm going with there. We got another question. HC Purdy asked, this is a draft question. He was just asking, why are some sophomores draft eligible and others aren't? Really, it comes down to age. You have to be 21 by a certain cutoff. I believe that cutoff is August 1st, but it might be the end of August, something along those lines. But it's somewhere in that range. I don't think it's on draft day. I believe it is the beginning or end of August. I don't remember for sure. And then he also asked any opinion on switch pitcher. I always forget how to say this name. I want to say it's Durangelo Chinte, but I can't remember. He's from Mississippi State. The Brewers actually drafted him out of high school a couple of years ago. He, to me, is not a switch pitcher at the next level. I think that'd be really hard to do for anybody. And I think he's a much better pitcher from the right side. So my guess is that's where he ends up sticking. I would love if the Brewers took him again, but I would hope it would be more in that like round 2 to 3 range. And for most of the season, that's where it was looking like to end up. But now it's kind of looking like he's jumped up into that first round conversation. And I would guess he wouldn't fall much further than the Brewers competitive or the pick that they got from the Orioles in the Burns trade. So I'm not sure he'll end up there, but the Brewers do love them. Some Mississippi State hitters seem to have a good relationship with the program. So it wouldn't shock me. And again, it's a guy they already drafted once, so they may be interested in him. And then we got one more question. Tyler Labs asked, out of Luke Adams, Mike Bovee, Brock Wilken, and Juan Baez, who do you think has the best shot at locking down the hot corner for a decade? This is a hard question. I'm genuinely a big fan of all 4 of them. They are very different profiles, kind of across the board. But for me, I'm going Brock Wilken. None of them are great defensively, but I do think Wilken has the highest ceiling with the bat and the potential to be a legit like middle of the order hitter, whereas the rest of them I would guess would settle more into a either top of the order or that 6-7 spot in the order type of guy. But all 4 of them are ones that I could see having major league careers. I just think Wilken probably has a little bit more of a ceiling and probably a higher likelihood of hitting that ceiling than the others, in my opinion. But yeah, moving on to some notable pitching performances from the past week and a little bit beyond. Casey Hunt, I've talked about him a couple of times. He's been a reliever since he signed with the Brewers. He made the first start of his career last Thursday, and he's actually making the second one right now. I'm going to try and check that while I'm talking. But in his first start, he went 5 scoreless. He had 0 walks, 5 strikeouts, and only 3 hits allowed. Since his promotion to high A, he has a whiff rate of 40.9%, which is in the 98th percentile. His strikeout rate is 38%, which is also in the 98th percentile. And he has a 22-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio, which leads all of high A. I'm trying to pull up this box right now. The Timber Rattlers are up 6-0 in the 8th, so he must have had a pretty good start. Yeah, he went 6 innings, 1 hit, 1 walk, and 8 strikeouts, no earned runs. So he seems to have made the move to the starting rotation pretty easily. And if he's a starter, he's legitimately a guy that should probably start popping up on top 30 lists and maybe even in the middle of those lists. Like he's had some ridiculous numbers for a guy who signed undrafted as a reliever just this past year. This is about as good a start as you could possibly have. Moving on, though, we have Wenderling King. He is in the DSL. He signed in this year's international class as an 18-year-old. He'll turn 19 in August. He's thrown 9 2/3 innings so far in the DSL. He has 16 strikeouts, no walks. He has hit 3 batters, so not as good as it might look on the surface. But from what I've been able to find, his fastball's already sitting around 90. He's got a slider and a changeup. Both look decent. There's not much info out there on him right now, but 16 strikeouts and 9 2/3 with a pretty good job limiting hit free passes. You got to take notice of that. Maybe a guy we end up seeing move stateside at some point this year, though that is becoming more difficult with all the new roster rules. So who knows, but I would imagine somebody we see next year for sure. Another recent international signee, Daniel Corniel. This is a guy who his last start, he went 6 innings, 1 earned run. It was a solo homer. He struck out 9, only 2 walks. The walks have been up a little bit in May, but he has been doing a much better job recently. His last couple starts of getting the walks back down. He's got a good breaking ball. It's a little inconsistent right now. The 4-seam fastball definitely has what the Brewers like, and that's that low arm slot, the kind of the 3/4 release, and a flat, kind of solid vertical approach angle. He's sitting 90 to 92 with it. He's gotten a bit higher at times. He seems to mix in one that runs a little bit more at times, and then he also throws a changeup that flashes some pretty big things. Speaking of really good changeups, we got to talk about our regularly scheduled Craig Yoho update. Got to do it every week. Since moving to AA, he hasn't allowed a single earned run. He's only thrown 5 2/3 innings. In that time, he has a 59.1% strikeout rate. His FIP is negative 0.14, and even though that's a tiny sample, it's just hilarious to me to see a FIP under 0. His whiff rate is 46.2, which is as good as it's been at any other level. He's good. I believe he could pitch in MLB right now and get outs and perform. So he might not be long for AA. We may see him in Nashville soon enough. That would not be surprising at all. But yeah, we'll just continue to update Craig Yoho until he's in the majors, and then we get to talk about him in the other part of the podcast. But moving on to the offensive side, Luke Adams, one of the guys we just had a question about, kind of. He is up to 5 homers now. He's showing some of that power. This is a guy who had multiple balls of over 110 miles per hour last year as a 19-year-old. His strikeout rate is 19.9%. Great spot to be in for somebody who hits for as much power as he does. His walk rate is 16.6%. Again, fantastic. His weighted runs created plus, he was struggling for a bit to start the year, is all the way up to 137. He's 12 of 18 on stolen bases, which isn't a very good ratio. You don't really want to be under, really, with the new rules, probably 80%. This is more in that, 67% range, but it does show the athleticism that he has for a really tall and really built dude. So his walk rate is in the 95th percentile for the level. He takes the fewest overall swings per pitch of any player at the level. So some of it is that he just kind of lets the pitchers make mistakes, but he damages pitches that are in the zone. His swinging strike rate of 7.1% is amongst the best in all of at the high A level. And his whiff rate is still pretty good as well. It's 21.6%, which is in the 84th percentile. So a lot of good things from Adams. I think he can handle third base. I wouldn't be surprised if they try him in like a corner outfield spot at one point. There's kind of a Hunter Renfroe vibe to his whole profile for me, but he's doing very well. And then another young player, the 6th round pick last year, Cooper Pratt. Nobody could believe the Brewers got him where they did. Started, I wouldn't say slow. He had an injury early on. He wasn't showing much pop, but he was having pretty good approach, I would say. He won't turn 20 until late August still. He is now sporting a 145 WRC plus and an 824 OPS. Those have both just skyrocketed lately. He has been mashing. His in-zone contact rate is 85.2%. Very, very good bat-to-ball skills. He's got a better than average whiff rate, strikeout rate, and walk rate for the level. and his 30.6% line drive rate is in the 95th percentile. So approach-wise, he just has a very, very mature approach for his age, and he hits the ball pretty hard. It would actually benefit him to probably turn a few of those line drives into fly balls. But he has started to show up a little bit more power. He's up to 2 homers now. I think he looks more than fine at short, and the arm is definitely good enough to play there. I think he's ready for high A already at 19 years old, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see him make that move soon. And I'm going to run through a couple DSL updates. We talked about a chunk of these guys last time, but Jesus Mate, he's at a 1264 OPS in his first 27 plate appearances. He's got 2 doubles, 2 triples, and a homer, 2 for 2 on steals, 4 walks to only 5 strikeouts. So a lot of good signs for what you can see when you're basically only getting, obviously, box score breakdowns of these guys. One name I did not talk about last week, Luis Pena, and he was one of the bigger bonuses handed out in the Brewers class. He got an $800,000 bonus. He's at 31 plate appearances. His OPS is 1414. He has 2 doubles and a homer. He's hitting .577, and he is 15 for 15 on stolen base attempts in 7 games. He's also walked 4 times to only 3 strikeouts. He has shown power. He's already hit a homer and 2 doubles. He is stealing bases at over 2 a game, and he has not been caught yet. And he's walking more than he's striking out. This is a guy that is popping onto, if you follow fantasy people at all on Twitter, this name has been popping out a lot because even though it's a tiny sample, he is showing every single sign of what you're hoping for, and especially in a fantasy-related world where stolen bases are very valuable. But I mean, this is the type of profile that if he actually can, he's not going to maintain it at this level, but if he can maintain this type of player where he can show the pop, steal bases, people think he could stick at short, but he's got a plus arm that could move to third with ease. Like, this is a really, really interesting player. Jose Anderson, we talked about him last week, a $60,000 signing bonus who showed up and looked really good immediately. He has now hit 4 home runs. He hit a homer in his first game, and he has hit 4 now in 23 at-bats. His OPS is 1682, 3 walks, 5 strikeouts, so a pretty good spot in that regard. He'll be 17 the entire season, and he does not turn 18 until the end of November. Just an incredible start for a lot of these guys. And then one name I had never heard at all before this, Kevin Garcia. He's a catcher. He is 3 for 10 this year at the plate. All 3 hits are home runs. He is 16 years old this entire season. He's walked 4 times. He has struck out 5 times, so it's in this tiny sample, he struck out a decent amount, but it's been very 3 true outcomes type so far. But a 16-year-old catcher that's showing home run pop regularly in the DSL is unbelievably rare. That does not happen much. So this is a guy I definitely will want to learn more about. I have no idea how his defense holds up or anything like that, but it's been a fun start for the DSL. And as always, all the stats I read with percentiles and all of that is heard to media via our subscription we have with Brewer Fanatic. So a lot of good stuff from that. And then quickly, I'll start the injury updates here on the minor league side. Alexander Corniel, been one of the better starting pitcher surprises, I guess, this year. He had been moving quickly, and he hasn't. And then he had a rough year last year in Appleton, but he's had a really good start to this year. He did hit the IL. We don't really know what the cause is right now, but he is on the IL for now, the 7-day. Kalen Nicasia is a name I talked about a few times early on. He's been hurt for a while. He did get transferred to the 60-day. Sounds like it's not a very good injury. We don't know if we'll see him again this year, so that is unfortunate because he was having a bit of a breakout. And then I don't even know if this qualifies as a minor league one, but Joey Weimer did hit the IL for the Sounds as well. Again, I'm not 100% sure what happened on that. I believe it was a lower body one again, but yeah. And then that brings us into our major league injuries, and I think Jack's got a little more insight on some of these, so I'm going to let him take over from here.
So the first one we're going to talk about is Robert Gasser. Pat Murphy is approaching this as if he's out for the year. I'll kind of recap the way that everything has gone down so far, but basically Gasser hit the IL after his last start. The Brewers' initial evaluation of his elbow is that because there is no new damage to the ligament, that he could rehab it and come back and pitch again this year. He then went to go see Dr. Neil Elatrosh in Los Angeles, and Elatrosh told him that the ligament is intact, the structural integrity of it is fine, but it's weakened. It's not as strong as you'd like to see that UCL be. So for that reason, Elatrosh recommended surgery just to get everything strengthened and get it to the point where there's no potential future concerns. Elatrosh was essentially worried that when you have a weakened ligament like that, that Gasser could tear it in the near future, and then he's in a rough spot. So the idea there is just get the surgery now, bite the bullet. Gasser obviously going to get a third opinion to decide for sure what he's going to do. But what Murphy told us is that in his mind, first of all, if you're getting a world-renowned surgeon telling you that your best course of action long-term is to get surgery, those words aren't thrown out there lightly. Like, that's an opinion that matters quite a bit. So that sounds kind of like the opinion that Murph is gravitating toward, or at the very least, it's enough to give him some serious concern about Gasser's ability to come back this year. That's probably the better way to put it. Murph also made an interesting comment just about this and about Gasser's future, in which he said if he rehabs again, that'll be the second time this year already that he's rehabbed from some kind of injury in his elbow. And he's like, when he comes back, we really don't know for sure where he's going to be, both physically and mentally, just as a rookie trying to navigate stuff like this. And asking him to come back again this year might just be too tall of an order. So Murph is approaching it as if Gasser is going to be out for the rest of the year. He threw him into the same club as Wade Miley and Brandon Woodruff, guys who we won't see pitch in 2024. So we'll see what the word is on that third opinion. But based on those comments from Murphy, if that is the direction that at least some decision makers within the Brewers organization are leaning, then, we could see him heading for surgery. But TBD on what happens. No one has made a decision for sure. We haven't heard the outcome of that third opinion yet, so we'll kind of see what happens. But just for fans who are listening along, I would mentally prepare yourself to not see Robert Gasser pitch again this year. But we'll see for sure what happens on that front. More positive notes, we talked about DL Hall, Garrett Mitchell, JB Bukauskas. All of them were assigned to Nashville's roster earlier on Thursday, so they're going to complete rehab assignments. We could see all three of those guys in the near future. TBD on Hall, depends on if they're going to build him up or pitch him out of the bullpen. We haven't really gotten a firm answer for sure on which role he's going to be filling. There have been some indications that they might just keep him in a shorter role because then they don't have to worry about stretching him out. They can come back sooner, get some production from him this year. So we'll see what happens on that front. Jacob Junis threw a sim game in Arizona on Wednesday. The plan was for him to go 4 ups. We haven't heard anything about that assignment yet, but I'm sure we'll get an update from Murphy on Friday night when we talk to him before the game. Basically, what they wanted to do with this one was the last time he pitched in Nashville, the command wasn't great and the velocity was down a few ticks. So they wanted to send him back to Arizona for just a more controlled environment, is what Murphy kept calling it. They could just essentially control how many pitches they wanted him to throw in a simulated inning, how many ups you want to give him, and just get some better tech on him to kind of see where he's at with everything. He basically said there were a few things we wanted him to work on, so we're going to send him down to a lower pressure, more controlled environment to do that. But the hope was that if he got out of that sim game and everything looked clean, that he could be ready to come back in the very near future at any point, is what Murphy said. So we'll see what the results were from that outing, though. We should find out more about that soon. And then finally, Joe Ross had a setback the last time that he attempted to throw. So it sounds like we're not going to see him for a little bit. He's basically been shut down again until the pain subsides. So might still be looking at a lengthier absence for Joe Ross. We'll wrap up the program by previewing the series against the Reds. The Brewers will wrap up their homestand with a 3-game showdown with their division rivals. Game 1, like we talked about before, Freddie Peralta is listed as the probable starter, so we'll see how he looks on Friday night. He'll be going against Hunter Green. That game is going to begin at 7:10 Central Time. Game 2, we're going to see Bryce Wilson face off against left-hander Andrew Abbott. If you guys remember, he was the rookie who quickly rose through the minor league ranks for the Reds last year and did a pretty nice job for them. Brewers saw him a couple times early in his career. That game is going to start at 3:10. And then Game 3, another afternoon game, Colin Ray against Frankie Montas. That one will start at 1:10. As always, we will be back with you guys to break down all of that action at the same time next week. As a reminder, you can follow the podcast at BF_pod on Twitter /X. What do most people call it? Is it still Twitter for most people?
I don't hear anyone call it X.
Okay. I just try to cover my bases with that, but usually I call it Twitter as well. You can follow myself at @ByJackStern. You can follow Spencer at SMichaelis234. As always, thank you all for listening, and thank you to everyone who sent in your questions. I don't believe we got to all of them this week, but we try to do the best we can while also working within the constraints of not wanting the podcast to go 3 hours. But we appreciate the listenership, and we appreciate all of the engagement that we get. As a reminder, just keep sending in your questions. Try to send them to the podcast accounts, whether that's on Twitter or our podcast email. That ensures that we will see them. If you send one directly to us in a Twitter reply, we're not going to make an effort to find it just for planning purposes, but we do appreciate all the engagement we get. Until next week, go Brewers.